A very, very warm welcome to you all. Very festive, slightly dystopian welcome to you all to this event, to this debate, the future of the past. This event really concludes our celebration of 100 years of archaeology at Cardiff University in partnership with Amgueddfa Cymru, the National Museum of Wales. A very warm welcome to you all. My name is Dave Wyatt, Dr. Dave Wyatt. I've been actually at Cardiff for a quarter of those 100 years. I've been here since 1995 and I never left. I came here as an undergraduate, as a mature student, and I'm still here and they just can't get rid of me. So my role in this is to chair the session tonight. I'm actually employed at the university in this school I'm a reader in early medieval history. I'm not an archaeologist, but I did archaeology partly during my degree. And I've been involved in a lot of archaeology projects through the other side of my job, which is a community engagement coordinator for the school. And I'm involved in lots of co-production projects, really working with communities to create new knowledge and to think about how we use archaeology, if you like, to address contemporary challenges in certain communities as well. So that's why, if you like, this event's really exciting for me. I think it's fair to say that our centenary of archaeology at Cardiff didn't quite play out as we had planned for fairly obvious reasons. But there have been a series of incredible and fantastic digital events and activities like this one, that some of which are still available actually to view. If you go to the Cardiff Art 100, you can catch up on some of those still. And huge credit has to go to the organiser, to James, to Jackie, for still pulling off what has been, I think, a really exciting and vibrant Cardiff 100 celebration. But I think a special thanks has to go to a team of postgraduates who've really delivered a lot of it and facilitated a lot of it. I'm going to name a few names: Adele Bricking, Katie Faylace. Hopefully they're both here. Anton, of course, Anton Axelson, who's here helping today. Kiara Butler. I'm sorry if I've forgotten anyone else, but absolutely fantastic work by postgraduates to make this event happen over the whole of the year. So thank you very much. Can we all give them a little round of applause? There we are. Right. So, yes, it's been an unusual and challenging and momentous year, hasn't it? Not just in relation to the pandemic, but also in relation, I think, to our relationship with the past, our views of the past, or indeed what constitutes the past, or what constitutes heritage. Who gets to decide? The fall of Colston's statue, the Black Lives Matter movement, the debate over problematic terms like Anglo-Saxon, the challenge to decolonising museums and stately homes, and decolonising indeed the school and higher education curricula. So, as ever, let's face it, the past is and always has been politicised, and it is intimately related and affiliated with power structures and also challenges to those power structures. So tonight, I hope we are going to, if you like, consider and get to talk about some of these things with this amazing panel of people, all of whom I believe are alumni or like me, have a close affiliation with this school, with our school in Cardiff, here in the School of History, Archaeology and Religion. So before we get cracking, each of those speakers are going to speak in turn and give us a short little take, if you like, their take on the future of the past. I'm going to be quite strict with them on the times. And how this is going to go is I will introduce each speaker in turn, and then they will speak, they will give their 5 minutes. We will hold off on questions, I think, until the end, unless anyone has anything really, really burning that they want to ask a particular speaker. So please let the speakers speak first, and then we'll bring it all together and everyone will have a plenary in it and people can chip in and ask their questions of the panel. So I will introduce each speaker in turn. They will talk, then I'll introduce the next speaker and we'll work through our speakers and I will introduce them like that. And then after that, we will open it up for debate and questions from everyone in the audience, whether you would like to speak or whether you would like to type in the chat. We can do either. I've not really chaired anything this size before. There are now 46 people in the room. So I think we're going to just bear with us. I'll try to chair fairly the questions. When you ask a question, if you can direct it at who you want it directed to on the panel, please. That would be helpful. And obviously, please keep it civil and festive, but also informal and fun. Okay. I could ask everybody who's not speaking to mute as well, so that we don't get any dogs or cats or feedback or stuff like that going on, and that would be really helpful. I think most people are muted anyway. So, shall we begin? So, we're going to begin with Professor Carl Heron of the British Museum. Welcome, Carl. Carl is the Director of Scientific Research at the British Museum. He was a professor in his academic career, as he says. He has honorary professorships, but he doesn't like to be called a prof. Good for you, Carl. He did his PhD here in Cardiff, yeah, between 1985 and 1988, which is actually before me. So I will now pass over to Carl, and we would like to hear your take on the future of the past.
Thank you so much, Dave, for the introduction. It's really great to see so many people that I know in Cardiff that are still there. I thought my 3 years at Cardiff had been largely expunged from the record. I'm sure it was a very small and indistinguished part of your wonderful 100 years. So, okay, I'm going to rocket through this so that I've only got 5 minutes. So, when I did my PhD in Cardiff, I was based in the Department of Chemistry. So my supervisor had a joint appointment between archaeology and chemistry. But of course, as an archaeologist, I trained as an archaeological scientist at Bradford before joining Cardiff. And I built up a very strong relationship with students and staff at Cardiff. It was very much part of my formative years. So in terms of thinking about what to say about the future of the past, I recall the words of a friend and former professor in Cardiff, Ian Freeston. And when he was asked back in 1987 to identify research priorities in archaeological science, he came up with this statement. His statement would inevitably be a mixture of pious hope, ill-founded intuition, plagiarism, and personal prejudice. And my comments in this little short presentation to you this evening will follow that viewpoint faithfully. Now, I have a real interest, an unhealthy interest in the archaeology of the book cover, i.e. book covers that have been used to signal a particular moment in archaeological time. And this is my personal favorite. It shows an excavation in progress in the mid-1960s. Two diggers, possibly students, are in a trench. The director stands over the trench, chatting to the local constabulary. An interested, perhaps uncertain, or even bemused public gazes on. There appears to be some detachment between the archaeologists and the public. They stand behind the barrier, whereas the authorities, police officers included, are on the inside. The archaeologists are somewhat oblivious to the onlookers. Engagement seems limited and rather constrained. Now, for the Christmas trivia quiz, there will be special prizes awarded for identifying the site that's being excavated, and the archaeologist on the right-hand side, standing above the trench, who 55 years later is still very much active in the discipline. Okay, from the colourful scene of approach to archaeology to the rather bland cover of the British Academy report, Reflections on Archaeology, dating to 2017, so much later. And I extract a single sentence from that document that signals the scope of the future of the past. Archaeology has a uniquely long-term perspective on subjects as diverse as human health and well-being, the relationship of humans to climate change, economic risk and resilience, violence versus cooperation, ecological sustainability, inequality and identity. These broad themes are really important, but how do we ensure that people are able to traverse those barriers and become actively engaged in the study of the past? I know that community archaeology and public engagement is a cornerstone of your activities in Cardiff. Now, in addition to my I Spy books, the larger one on the left-hand side dates to 1966, I feature a quote from a British Museum press release last week. The current COVID-19 pandemic has seen a boost in finds from back gardens recorded with the museum's portable antiquities scheme. In 2020, over 47,000 finds have been recorded. Might one of the few benefits of the 2020 pandemic be that people develop a stronger sense of place, of history, and the role of objects as a gateway to understanding the past? Now, my new role, and I haven't been here for very long, is in a museum. I'm a poacher turned gamekeeper. My career is largely academic, and I joined the British Museum in 2016. Museums are vital to the future of the past. Mortimer Wheeler, when he took up his post in Cardiff in 1920, had a joint post between a lectureship in the Department of Archaeology, in the university, and keeper of archaeology at the National Museum of Wales, fundamental to developing the discipline. The crisis in our museums is acute, and the pandemic is amplifying the challenges further. Ironically, the Edward Jenner Museum in Gloucestershire, the birthplace of vaccination at the end of the 18th century, is in danger of closing to the public. Chronic underfunding is threatening a sector that should be a focus throughout the UK and further afield for improving accessibility to the study of the past, promoting well-being and engaging people with a changing material world, the climate crisis, inequality, colonialism, and so on. And as I said, I'm relatively new to the museum. The collections where I'm based reflect human history across the world, including the difficult histories of colonial expansion and conflict. They also reflect efforts to preserve, document, and share culture and heritage. The values and the potentialities that collections have today are very different from those that motivated their formation. Nevertheless, the collections, or at least part of them, remain contested, and restitution debates may intensify. There are people far more knowledgeable than I about the history, role, and context of museums. And it's very sad that the funeral of one curator at the British Museum took place yesterday. But it's also a time to celebrate what Ian Jenkins, the author of the book on the left, stood for. He devoted his working life of 42 years to the British Museum. And one obituary published in The Guardian records that he was approachable to a fault. He enlightened school children and peers alike on the British Museum's classical collections, as well as the institution's own history. Ian was quoted as saying, "I feel I work in an institution where all cultures are shown, but none is privileged, and all religions are represented, but none is preached." In summary, the future of the past lies in investing in these people who dedicate their lives to helping others to traverse those barriers, physical and conceptual, that exist in our uncertain and somewhat bemused world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carl. Okay, now I'm going to keep moving, if that's okay, to our next speaker, unless anyone has any burning questions for Carl from the excellent summary there, but we can come back to all the speakers shortly. But I will leave it a second just in case anyone has a specific question. I'm not seeing anything, so I'm going to move on then to welcome Kate, Kate Roberts from the Welsh Government. Kate, you graduated in Cardiff in 1990, about 5 years before I got here, in archaeology. Kate went on to complete her PhD at Cambridge University, studying archaeological geophysics. She joined the Royal Commission on Ancient Historical Monuments in England in '94, working on an aerial photographic unit for a whole year, participating in the Salisbury Plain mapping project. Lectured in archaeology at Trinity College, Carmarthen for 2 years, joined Cadw, wow, what a career, as Assistant Inspector of Ancient Monuments, working on designation of scheduled monuments there. Kate has remained with Cadw's Archaeological Inspectorate, working in a range of management and conservation roles. And since August last year, she's been in charge of Cadw's Historic Environment branch, which delivers statutory services and advice in support of protection, management and promotion, of course, of the historic environment in our fair Wales. Over to you, Kate, on the future.
Thanks.
Past.
And hello, everyone. Thank you. It's lovely to be here. What a shame that we weren't able to be here in person. It would have been great, but this is the next best thing, so I'm glad to be here. As you will have heard from my introduction, I spent most of my career in what we'd call heritage management. So I'd like to approach this debate from that angle and think about what the future of the past means in terms of historic environment management as we talk about it now. Most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Cadw, the Welsh Government's Historic Environment Service. And the work we do, particularly in terms of caring for some of Wales' most famous sites, our castles, abbeys, houses, an awful lot of prehistoric burial chambers. But there's another side to what Cadw does as well, which is the work we do to deliver the statutory services, the advice, the support, the protection and management, and the promotion of the wider historic environment of Wales. And this is where I operate mostly, although I've also been involved in many of our projects at our sites. In practice, this means that we're always advocating for the importance of the past, producing guidance, and working with owners, managers of historic properties, ranging from individuals through to community groups, local authorities, national parks, third sector, government departments, and we also give grants and support organisations that deliver archaeological services, including, importantly, of course, the 4 Welsh archaeological trusts. As you can imagine, I've been working with Cadw since '97, as you say, starting as assistant, working my way up. And during that time, I've seen a lot of changes. But I thought for today's debate, I'd pick out 3 trends that I think are continuing and will help inform our discussion. I think a lot of them have some resonance with the previous talk as well. Firstly, I think I'd like to pick up on the expansion of what we actually recognise as the historic environment and what we consider to be significant, which is continually evolving. When I graduated from Cardiff back then in 1990, I think there was still very much an emphasis in heritage management on the individual site, and also quite traditional historic sites. Amazingly, back in 1990, the first World Heritage Site in Wales had only just been inscribed 3 years earlier. And in keeping with that, not surprisingly, it was 4 castles associated with Edward I in Gwynedd. As with the previous speaker, it was all very led by the specialist and the advisors, but change was happening. Back in the early 90s, work began producing registers of historic parks, historic gardens. And then in 1998, which was just after I joined Cadw, we published the first register of historic landscapes of national importance. And I think that marked quite a sea change, not only because it really recognized larger scale concepts, the idea of landscapes as being historic, but because it was also produced in collaboration with the Countryside Council for Wales, Natural Resources as Wales as we know them today. So as such, it reflected a movement that was not just recognizing the importance of setting, of context, the interconnectedness of the historic environment, but it was also recognizing its relationship with the natural environment. And now these are all concepts and ideas that we take for granted today, but they're not that old when you think about it. Now, as well as that, I think there's been a great expansion and an increasing change in what we recognize as being historically significant, how we define significance. And this includes expanding our recognition to places such as battlefields, and also picking up on the intangible heritage, as illustrated by, say, the recent development of the lists of historic place names. I think this recognition of the breadth of the historic environment shows no sign of slowing, and it links very closely with what I would pick up as the second trend. And I think you'll recognize this coming from the previous presentation as well, which is the increasing democratization of our past and the greater participatory role of the public. At a statutory level, this is illustrated by an increased emphasis on consultation, which in Wales is now enshrined in our Historic Environment Act. But maybe more importantly and less formally, through the role of television and increasingly the internet as a means of actively involving the public in the exploration and discovery of the past. For example, through crowdsourced projects. A good example is the Royal Commission's Welsh Place Names project, which relies really heavily on crowdsourcing to produce the online maps and lists, while in practice, examples like the Afodia Coastal Watch project, which has been run by the Welsh Archaeological Trust, relied on local groups of volunteers on the ground monitoring sites around the coast. And there is undoubtedly an increasing role for the public in all areas of heritage management practice. And there is also, I think, a great appetite for it. If I can reflect this year, when we had that awful period when the travel restrictions prevented people from moving beyond a few miles of where we lived, we in Cadw collaborated with the National Lottery to launch a small grant scheme, which we called 15-minute heritage, reflecting the heritage you can find within 15 minutes of where you live. And we offered grants of up to £10,000 for communities to explore, to investigate, and to celebrate their local heritage. We hoped when we opened the grant that we would get enough applications to spend all of our £300,000 budget. Within 2 weeks, we'd received enough applications to spend £2 million of budget. That is an illustration of how much appetite and enthusiasm there was for this sort of thing. Thirdly, finally, I think we are entering a new age of discovery. A combination of our better archaeological techniques and a rapidly changing world will hopefully provide us with great opportunities to explore and investigate our past much more deeply. I say explore and investigate, but not necessarily, I suspect, to protect and preserve, since this may become increasingly challenging. Development will increase, inevitably colliding with historic sites, while climate change is imperiling others, as is already demonstrated in our sensitive coastal and river environments. While preservation may not be possible, we will have opportunities for discovery and examination that will expand our understanding. And I'm very interested to see how we will grasp and use these opportunities. So in conclusion, I believe that the past has a very interesting future ahead, and I'm looking forward to hearing other people's views and your questions. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Kate. Excellent. So, resonating with me, we've been doing our own back garden digs on the Kai Heritage project this year in Ely, and they've been fantastic too. So, anybody have any burning questions for Kate before we move on to our next speaker? Okay, well, I'm sure there'll be questions coming from all of you fairly shortly. And I'm going to now invite up to the podium Duncan Brown. Duncan, how are you? Historic England. Duncan is the head of...
Good. Nobody knows who I am on the recording, but it's me anyway. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, good. Okay. Throughout the last half decade at least, the past has been under threat. Not for the first time, it has been warped to serve the purposes of nationalism, specifically in this country to present Britain as a nation apart from continental Europe, able now, as it apparently has been before, to stand alone and defeat whatever assails us, which now includes climate change, disease, and probably global recession. Such distortions serve us badly and threaten the principles that we objective, devoted students of the past should seek to uphold. The past has genuine power to thrill and inspire awe, to engender curiosity, as we've just heard, and most importantly, to contextualize the present. By showing us where we have come from, we may comprehend where we are, to the benefit of where we are going. And that should be, and should always have been, the future of the past. If the lessons we learn are ignored, when, for instance, more accurate perspectives are distorted amidst the hypocrisies of political ambition, then our discipline suffers the risk of becoming irrelevant. Because if our work is seen as untrustworthy, or as it is elsewhere in the world, treasonous, then nobody will listen to what we have to say. One remedy I offer, and it's not the first time I've said this, is for all students of the past to promote ourselves and our labours behind a unified message, a single explanation of why understanding the past is important. Not why archaeology is important, but the past. There are many ways of studying the past, and archaeology is just one of them. And even there, a multitude of disciplines exist, from field work to finds analysis and beyond. It must be possible for historians, archivists, archaeologists and all to come together to promote the vital contribution we all make to our society and our culture through careful analysis and nuanced interpretation, not the jingoistic picking and mixing of hysterical half-truths and willful misconceptions. As for archaeology specifically, we would have to stop competing amongst ourselves. Our discipline is exceptional in being driven largely by commercial rather than academic considerations. And as a result, should it be more accessible, more open to change, more dynamic? If it were possible for profit to become secondary to the development of methodologies, research outcomes and communication, then the extraordinary levels of activity we've seen in the last 30 years, even in 2020, would have so much more impact. This may become more important to us now as the planning system suffers potentially a profound overhaul. If, with Carl on this last point, if they can survive in the short-term future, then I see museums becoming crucial to the promotion of the past as a powerful tool for learning and contextualizing the present. Even professional archaeologists and historians routinely characterize museums as dusty, fusty and dull, which of course is grossly inaccurate and serves only to undermine the credibility of those who make such comments. People instinctively turn to museums when they want to learn about their past. In a society where understanding the past is of prime importance, a network of highly functioning museums should be a welcome obligation, where they are recognised as the windows and doorways into our practices and perceptions. For we are the people carrying out research to everyone's benefit. My future for the past is one where we are all working together to promote the importance of our subject, the better able to withstand the threats of misrepresentation and misuse. The past informs our present, and that is our future. And that's me.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Duncan, so much for that. Any further questions at this stage? I think I will move on then to welcome, step up to the podium, Siobhan Stevenson, who graduated from Cardiff University in 1986 and has more than 30 years experience as a heritage professional. Siobhan developed and led the first MSc in collections care in the UK, based here at Cardiff University. And I have full memories of her being here, and I used to hang around the labs with my friend Heather. I wasn't even doing conservation. As a culture and arts manager for Belfast City Council, she authored and implemented Belfast's first culture and arts plan and subsequently integrated cultural strategy. Formerly head of collections at the National Museums of Northern Ireland and chair of the Institute of Conservation, she has a diverse background in care and collections, museum and private conservation practice, cultural policy, business planning and strategic development. Siobhan currently runs a successful consultancy, Legacy Conservation, offering advice and project management for collection care, collection storage and conservation. Based in Northern Ireland, she works for a range of national and international clients. Another amazing CV. Siobhan, please give us your take on the future of the past.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen, so hopefully, can you all see that? Yep.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, I'm going to jump straight in. The future of the past is a huge subject, and as a conservator, it's almost impossible to talk about how we conserve and care for the past without placing it in the wider cultural context. For my sins, I'm now in the private sector and I'm no longer chair of my professional body, so I feel like I'm a completely free agent with no corporate agenda. So the presentation I'm going to give is a very personal one, looking at some of the challenges for the heritage sector in general, and I'm hoping it's food for thought. But I'm taking quite a global perspective of this. Many of the issues that I'm going to talk about are embedded in global changes and really in how people engage with and consume culture and heritage. Heritage is in how it's appreciated, and when we talk about the future of the past, I think we're all thinking largely about the physical remains, our monuments, buildings, artworks and artefacts. We've very much been working to preserve and interpret the past against a background of what has been consumption up until now. Globally, I think there are now big counter trends, both for sustainability and also a migration of our focus towards the digital realm. Sorry, trying to get my slide to go on. There we go. This could be taking the long view. However, I think we're in a period of very accelerated cultural change, and the speed of technological advances is having a considerable and rapid impact on our habits and our values. The speed of digital change has been staggering, but we've been really slow to embrace moderation of online content. Things like copyright, accuracy, and social responsibility on content are still largely unregulated and unenforced. I'm hopeful that the responsibility of digital platforms to their users will become a bigger issue. Content accuracy featured as an issue during the US elections, and a couple of days ago we heard about landmark legislation which will extend the responsibility of social media companies towards their users, enforcing a duty of care on them. Does this mark a turning point in our relationship with digital? I sincerely hope so. There are huge opportunities for museums and heritage organisations to step into this gap. Our museums and heritage organisations still rank among the most trusted influences that there are in society, and there's still recognition of cultural institutions as having an authoritative voice. We have also unprecedented levels of public curiosity in cultural heritage. New technologies and more connected world offer ever-expanding opportunities to reach and involve more people. There's a growing appetite for my colleagues in the conservation profession to share our passion and the work that they're doing. It's vital that as we democratise access to our cultural heritage, we do not sell the public short by offering something that is dishonest, inaccurate or partial. It's an authenticity that the consideration of our cultural heritage provides us with the firmest and most robust defence for expertise. Yet we are faced with a popular denigration of the expert. Sorry, on to the next one. The public acceptance of who needs experts was a warning sign that we no longer value the informed opinion in quite the same way as we once did. It's now easy for anyone to Google a topic and come up with an interpretation that may or may not be well informed. The more sensationalist the interpretation, the more it is shared and the more currency it gets, and therefore the more general acceptance. The disastrous consequences of lack of expertise in conservation has given us some good stories, but the message of valuing professionalism, expertise, and approach that values authenticity are perhaps still struggling to get through. Within the sector, there also seems to be a trend away from the specialist and towards generalists. Original research, I feel, is really under threat in our heritage institutions. Care needs to be taken that we do not place less value on the product itself rather than its use in the public domain. How do we reward the originators of research when it's so easy to reproduce, distribute, and so difficult to tell what is authoritative and what is not? The emphasis in our funding regimes is one way. However, funding often places emphasis on the process rather than the product, and in particular public engagement, in a way which may not be best for the heritage. We've all seen the pictures of smiling kids waving trowels as evidence of a successful archaeological project, when the post-excavation and publication is left unsupported. Highlighting the importance of the heritage project, whether it's the archive, publication, site or building, and supporting the expertise that ensures this is reliable and authentic should be common mantras to all involved in our sectors. A huge challenge over the next decade is in meeting the global reduction in carbon emissions. The sustainability agenda will impact on all of us as the ambitious aspiration of transitioning the economy towards net zero is realised. The trend towards durability, protection, reuse and repair rather than remake is all positive for the heritage. Harnessing this towards a new appreciation of the past is part of the key to prioritising agendas that support archaeology and conservation and the integration in arenas such as museums, heritage organisations and academia. COVID-19 has dominated the political and cultural landscape across the last 10 months, and it would be remiss of me not to mention the enormous financial strain this has placed on our universities, cultural and heritage organisations. The impact of the government's funding strategy will continue to play out in the public finances for many years to come. Any future stimulus package may offer some hope for heritage in the form of infrastructure development, which is likely to be more focused on maintenance and revitalisation in order to produce the biggest and quickest return. Heritage could be in a good position to benefit from this type of funding. The archaeology and heritage is one of our most important cultural aspects. It is tremendously engaging, anchoring and inspirational part of the fabric of our society and has a fundamental role to play in how we acquire knowledge and develop and evolve culturally. Across the public sector, a focus on outcomes-based accountability means it's more important than ever to acknowledge connection and integrate work across sectors. Close and productive working relationships on the ground are essential to delivering improved outcomes for heritage. And although there's a risk that the heritage sector can be fragmented, in reality, it is this very diversity that may be its greatest strength. Perhaps the recent COVID emergency has made us all more aware that people are important assets. The future of the past is very much in the hands of the people who research, work and support the heritage. In fact, all of the people listening here. And I'll finish with 3 things to take away. To show that we can all help secure the future of the past by championing heritage, supporting professionalism and advocating for high standards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. That's fascinating, thought-provoking, plenty for us to get our teeth into there in questions. I'm now going to move to our final speaker so that we can get on to that discussion and debate. So I'm going to welcome Professor Robin Skeates up to the podium. Robin, welcome from Durham. Robin's first lectureship was at Cardiff. That's his connection. Back in 1994 to 95. I was just kind of starting to come down here at that point, Robin. This year, he stood in as a lecturer for Bill Manning, the fantastic Bill Manning, who was on research leave at the time. Robin is, of course, now a professor himself in the Department of Archaeology at Durham University, where he has recently completed a term of office as head of department. Well done. And his research ranges from Italian prehistory through to museum and heritage studies. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Robin.
Brilliant, thanks a lot. Let's just try and share my screen with you. Here we go. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay, I just wanted to thank Dave and say hello to Bill because I saw it, he's online. I want to begin and just say I'm really honoured to have been invited back to share my personal perspective with you today, and also, of course, my screen and my, my views. During my time in Cardiff, I began what turned out to be quite an extensive archaeological field survey with Cardiff students in the Welsh Uplands in collaboration with the National Trust. We recorded and helped to protect hundreds of sites ranging from prehistoric monuments to historic herder shelters and stone quarries. But I regret not going further interpretively in terms of the wider contextualization of the historical archaeology that we encountered, which has the potential to contribute to wider historical debates about connectivity, industrialization, and social inequalities on regional and global scales, which in turn could help deepen public understandings of the historic environment in Wales. I wish, for example, that I'd known about Richard Pennant, owner of the Penrhyn estate in North Wales, who in the late 18th century invested much of his Jamaican sugar fortune, generated by enslaved Africans, into the development of the Penrhyn slate quarry, which then provided his family with even greater wealth. Since my time in Cardiff, I've retained my passion for archaeological research, but I've also grown frustrated with those archaeologists and heritage professionals around the world who still lay claim to the material remains of the past as their own, and who share that past with the public on their own terms. I should emphasize that these attitudes are much less prevalent in the UK today and in Cardiff. There's hints of it tonight, perhaps. In particular, having deepened my global perspective on heritage through various cultural encounters, and having been intellectually re-energized by contemporary political debates, I feel that I personally have much more to do in practice, to work collaboratively, to help develop understandings of the past that have clearer relevance to the challenges faced by marginalized groups and communities in various parts of the world. What follows then are three very brief examples of projects I'm currently working on, which have the potential to reshape the past for the future in challenging, inclusive, and collaborative ways. I'm currently working with a new PhD student, Reba Maka, on a history of collections project designed to identify where we find Black bodies in Greco-Roman collections of artworks, and to document how those artworks have been used in shaping of both white and non-white identities between the 19th century and the present day. I'm also working on a collaborative project between Durham and a growing network of museum, heritage and education organisations in Jordan, dedicated to enhancing the accessibility of Jordanian museums to young people and strengthening the capacity and sustainability of Jordanian museum education through staff training, partnership and experimental education events. One of our successes has been to demonstrate that it's possible to work in partnership equitably, according to the principles of inclusivity, shared decision-making and equal benefits. In particular, we're committed to placing Jordanian interests first and to bringing about self-determined change. My third example is a grant application I've just submitted. So anyone who wants to give us some money, vote here, please. It's in collaboration with a group of archaeologists from across the global south and at Durham University, plus the board and editors of the archaeology journal, Antiquity. The idea is for us to work with 24 early career researchers from South Asia, the Middle East and Africa to help them overcome entrenched inequalities and develop their careers through a one-year program of writing workshops focused on writing high-impact publications and grant-winning proposals. Our ultimate goal is to see the Global South play a prominent part in rewriting world archaeology. In conclusion then, through this personal narrative, I've sought to argue that the future of the past is not ours to seek to dominate. And by ours, I mean archaeologists and heritage professionals of European descent and academic tradition. Instead, I've tried to point out the scholarly potential and ethical necessity of continued critique and of sincerely collaborative work within and beyond the discipline and profession of archaeology that can have a positive impact on marginalized communities and their cultural heritage at a time of global challenges. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Robin. Thank you for that. Again, another fascinating, provocative, and lots of food for thought there from all speakers. We've had, I think, a bunch of themes coming up there, strands that have come through, if you like, from those, the movement from top down towards a democratization of exploring of the past, and inclusive exploring of the past, which recognises the significance for perhaps multiple interpretations and for and how that can challenge power. We've seen a lot about, we've heard a lot about threats from things like climate change, economic challenges that are huge, through to obviously political populism and a real kind of assault on the specialist and the value of the specialist within this context. So I want to thank you all so much for that very, very rich set of thoughts. And before we just move to questions, I would like you all, if you would, to switch, unmute yourselves and give these guys a round of applause for that. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. So let us move now to the discussion element. And I very much would welcome questions for the panel from anyone in the room. Whether you want to do that vocally or whether you want to put it in the chat, it's entirely up to you, whichever you're most comfortable with. But please, questions, could you direct your questions at a particular individual if possible, or if you want direct at all panel members? I leave that up to you. Please, I open the floor. We've got a question there from James, or a poser, which is the past or the pasts. Would anyone like to comment on that?
If no one wants to comment, I do. I mean, the reason I use the plural is that it's partly from my experience, because for those of you who don't know, for 5 years I was away from Cardiff and I was director of the British School at Athens, and I'm partly directing this to Carl, Heron, and I'm partly directing this to Robin. And just anecdotally, the first time I met Ian Jenkins was at the British School at Athens, not in London. And obviously, Carl Heron gave an example of something that is called by two names. It's called the Elgin Marbles in the UK, and it's called the Parthenon Marbles if you're in Greece. And when I took up the post in Athens, the first question I was asked by members of the Greek Archaeological Service was, what's your view on the Parthenon Marbles? And there's some context to this, because my PhD supervisor was Anthony Snodgrass, who is now the leader of the, or the president of the campaign for the restitution of the Parthenon Marbles. So the question of whose past and what past and who it belongs to becomes pretty urgent if you're in that position. And the other reason I'm saying past or pasts is again, whose perspective? I mean, I know that Robin has just said, okay, let's get less Eurocentric in our perspective. It's actually quite difficult to do that. And these questions have been around for a while. Back in 1943, there was a conference in London called The Future of Archaeology. And there's a wonderful quote from somebody who was a participant then, the great J.L. Myers. And he asked a question which has never been answered, but needs to be answered. It's partly directed to Alan, this one. On what terms are we prepared to allow the Ruritanian Academy to survey and excavate Offa's Dyke or Long Barrows in Cotteswold? So, I mean, or the Deutsches Archaeologisches Institute to excavate Stonehenge would be another example.
I'm going to let Carl go first on that one. I'm happy to respond as well.
Oh, great. Thank you very much, Robin. I'm really a laboratory scientist, so yeah, I forgot to mention archaeological science, which of course has made great inroads and makes a huge contribution to the study of the past. James makes incredibly important points, and multivocality has got to be addressed in the way in which we present our heritage and the way in which museums have to think about the way in which they develop in the future. Ian Jenkins was a great gentleman, and he collaborated openly with Greek archaeologists and classicists and vice versa. You know, it didn't blight his life. The only time he had great difficulty was when he hosted a conference at the British Museum about the difficult history of cleaning, interestingly, the Parthenon marbles, and the ways in which they had been treated by sort of in effect behind the scenes at the British Museum, and that caused him a great deal of angst, because of course there was a difficult history there. At the British Museum, I mean, the Parthenon marbles is but one example of many, many contested situations and objects, and we face that every day. But we also work very closely along the lines that Robin articulated of collaboration, of co-creation. The Iraq training scheme, for example, where we work to try and rebuild cultural heritage in areas that were decimated by extreme viewpoints and destruction of that nature. And the museum's really thinking seriously about how it's going to redisplay in the future its collection, and how it captures the importance of the issues of colonialism and destruction and desecration that inevitably happened. I'm going to say that I don't have the answers to these. I'm currently ploughing through Dan Hicks's book. I did put the front cover on one of my slides, and it's called The Brutish Museums, in the same font as the way in which the British Museum uses its font. And it's hard reading. It raises important and salient questions that we really have to be thinking about. But I think I would say that my only sense of being positive about this is that we are at least considering those issues now, I think, behind the scenes in the British Museum. I think I've only been there for 5 years, but my sense was 10, 20 years ago, these issues would not have been openly debated and discussed within the museum and between museum professionals and the wider communities. They are at least being addressed and considered. I'm not sure there's going to be much change immediately, but nevertheless, I think these points of view and these important considerations are being considered more and more and more. Now,
I was going to say that leads us on to a question as well from Jackie Mulville, perhaps, and perhaps Robin, you could pick this up a little bit. But how do we stop the past being appropriated?
We can't. There's a quick answer to that one, but just to put my cards, on the table, I do accept, and in fact, I would argue that we need expertise. In fact, it might surprise you to hear that. And I believe that as scholars, we actually have a duty to aim for an objective past. But, and there's always a but, the reality is that there are multiple pasts, and James has acknowledged that. So we have to negotiate those multiple paths carefully. And just because it's difficult, James, it doesn't mean we can't try or we shouldn't try. But I do believe we should. And so, give you the example of Ribu, who I'm working with on Greco-Roman statuary and representations of Black people, persons of colour. It's a really sensitive topic, and I'm just treading on eggshells constantly working with her about museum representation, race, stereotyping, and what starting vocabulary to even use. And I can get it wrong every time I speak with her. We've just got to work together on this, and it's a tricky sensitivity. To hide away from them is irresponsible.
We might not be able to prevent the past from being appropriated, but what we can do, alongside every other so-called specialist in any discipline, is engender respect for objective analysis, as I called it, nuanced interpretation. If people understand the processes by which we arrive at the conclusions that we do, then it isn't just jumping on a conspiracy theory and launching that to see how far it goes. Then we stand a better chance of our past being understood and not misrepresented or appropriated. There are many versions of how you understand the past, and those are to be welcomed into an informed debate. But what we need to do is have respect for the ways in which we reach our interpretations, and engender that and develop that across society, so that people, as I said, realise how important a clear understanding of the past can be in developing present perceptions, both social and cultural.
Can I come in, or Dave, can I come in there?
Yes, please do.
I mean, a lot of these issues are very current issues. Obviously, there's a very contested past here in Northern Ireland, and there's a duty for the museum. I worked at National Museums Northern Ireland, where we worked quite extensively on navigating the past in terms of the different perspectives that are brought together. And obviously things like the history of the Troubles, there are very different perspectives in that. And I was certainly not saying that the past is the realm of specialists and shouldn't be the realm of anyone else. What I was trying to convey is that there's, as somebody with a specialist and expertise in the area, that you can bring something that is more objective and working alongside the communities, which, I mean, I did a huge amount of, both with my time in the council and also at the museum, that you can bring so much more in terms of what is the truth is not the right word, but where you can get close to an objectivity on the past rather than an emotional response to it. So I certainly wasn't saying that it should be the realm of specialists, in fact, far from it, but I was trying to say that there's a danger at the moment that everybody becomes an expert, and that we need to separate out people who have spent years working in the field and have a very detailed understanding from people who Googled it a couple of times. And actually, I'm not sure, the reason why I raised it is I'm not sure that that's where museums in particular are going at the moment. I think there's a trend away from specialist research areas, people bringing in-depth knowledge on collections towards a much more sweeping knowledge of collections. And it's something that I think we need to be very careful to preserve, in particular in the digital age. So I just wanted to sort of elaborate on that, but also say that it is, in fact, that type of very detailed working with communities to bring their past is something that is a job of work for museums here. It's part of day in, day out activities.
Thanks, Siobhan. Could I ask, perhaps, Kate, did you want to come in on that point about, as well? Because, obviously I've been involved quite a lot in working with and alongside communities, and where you have experts alongside community members, and how powerful that can be, actually. It's certainly working in communities that are cast as socially and economically challenged and marginalised, but how that can actually, that creation of pasts together with experts and community members alongside each other, can really create new life opportunities for everyone involved. So I wondered if you might want to come in on that, given what you were saying about the work of Cadw and on that stuff.
Oh, I wouldn't disagree with any of that. I must say, you don't have to go very far to come across contested pasts, do you? I have to say, one of the ones that I've dealt with the most directly, I suppose myself, is Carnarvon Castle. Which has got tremendous number of different interpretations upon it, whether you go from the straight history of why it was built and who built it, to the visitor who comes from outside of Wales, who often hasn't got a clue about any of that, and never heard of Edward I, certainly never heard of Llywelyn, doesn't know anything about that. And then there's a much more recent interpretation as well of its use, particularly in the 20th century with investitures. And we've been working for many years with the local community in Carnarvon, and of course with language, which is another aspect of that. Nothing can be more divisive in many cases than language in this sort of scenario, and how you talk about things. And I think we've really tried to work to change a lot of that and to really open people's minds on both sides. And I think that is always the risk, isn't it, that you you sort of assume that the expert is got to change everybody else's view, when often it's got to be both ways, hasn't it? You know, it is an emotional thing, culture. It is an emotional thing, heritage, and you can't completely remove that emotion and those feelings and those sensations, because that is just not reality. And I think we've made a lot of progress, I must say, in Carnarvon by recognising these contested views of the castle and what it stands for, from the person who says, I think it's a symbol of subjugation and should be removed, to those who say, you know, it's a wonderful tourist attraction, brings money into the area, you know, you name it, everybody has their opinion. But in recent years, the interpretation we've placed there has tried to be much more broad. It's tried to look at it from different angles and give both sides of the story. And in particular, and this doesn't just apply to Carnarvon, but applies across the piece, obviously everything we do is bilingual in terms of interpretation, but in the past, I think it's fair to say that it was all written by somebody, often in English, and then translated into Welsh, word for word. Whereas now we don't do that. We try to translate, we try to approach it from both angles separately, so that the interpretation actually recognises that someone coming with Welsh as their first language probably has got a different background, a different knowledge, a different understanding of a site than someone who doesn't. Not always, but you know, it's often the case. So by working with local groups and trying to understand where they're coming from, it helps us to put the interpretation that can actually hopefully try to break down and open people's eyes to different views. Although I have to say, one of the things that seems to have broken down attitudes more than anything in Carnarvon had absolutely nothing to do with us at all, but was the filming of The Crown. 2 years ago, when they have filmed, they recreated the investiture of Prince Charles, and they asked local extras to fill the space so that they could film it properly. And I think there was actually a certain amount of trepidation when they went out to say, would anyone actually want to come and be involved in this? Well, they were overwhelmed, of course, with people who wanted to be extras from the area, and everybody wanted to dress up in the 1960s and do their thing. And I have to say, it was actually tremendous. That, and we hosted the poppies, you know, which travelled around Britain and was hosted there. And many of the local people actually came into the castle for, they said, their first ever visit, in order to participate either in the poppies or in the filming. So it just shows you that sometimes maybe it's something that's a bit tangential, that can just be that thing that breaks through and allows people to think, well, maybe I can relook at it. I don't know.
Thank you, Kate. And there's a whole debate around poppies, so we will get into that. There is a couple of important questions in the chat, and I'd like to especially go to one from Katie there. Her question is about practical aspects of creating this future of the past that was projected and by the speakers, particularly the democratising of the discipline. How can we get there if job security, retention, and BAME scholars, BAME scholars, and practitioners, and funding in general is not good right now? What are the steps that we can use to combat these issues? I think that's a really interesting practical question. I wonder if anyone from the panel would like to comment on that. Nobody knows.
Have a go.
Go on, Robin.
It's I have a bunch of students working in museums and heritage at the moment, and of course, I feel really bad for them. They're in a terrible. They've come on our course this year to sort of jump out of the frying pan, but next year they're going to be even more in the fire, particularly in terms of the job market. It's an absolute nightmare, and the only thing I've been thinking of offering advice to them is just to really diversify. And I think we have to do this as archaeologists, diversify our expectations of what a job in archaeology, what a career in archaeology will look like, and nowadays, and what employment within the heritage sector will look like. And I think there's, it doesn't necessarily have to be self-employment, but I think we have to be quite creative in terms of thinking about our careers. When I'm booted out of mine after this panel as well.
Thank you, Robin. Does anyone else have any comments? Carl?
I think when I was at Cardiff, I was young and stupid, and now I'm old and stupid. And I think we need to think about the younger people here as well. I mean, we're hearing voices from people in our, quite advanced years. And before I went to the British Museum, that bastion of privilege and so on, I taught at the University of Bradford for 25 years. And many of my students were ethnic minority students from South Asia. And, when I talked to them, the barriers to their lives were immense. They're very bright people. Many of them had never been to London. Many of them didn't know what the British Museum was or the Natural History Museum. They had no understanding of how to differentiate, but these are very bright people. They go to the mosque in former textile mills, very dynamic, fluid, interesting, nuanced situations of their lives in West Yorkshire. And sometimes I wonder, with some of our debates, we are not able, we're able to have a good intellectual debate, but we're not able to connect and understand and empathize and actually do something about some of the challenges. And somebody put a really important point about retention of BAME scholars and so on. We just do not have enough people coming from diverse backgrounds into the subjects that we cherish. And we have to do something about it somehow. I don't know the answer. I mean, I've been fascinated by the role of science within coronavirus and COVID-19. Science is a terribly messy subject. It's not linear, it's not simple. And I often feel the study of the past is not a bad analogy to the way in which we've seen science. We'll have a contradictory paper in the Lancet, one of the most prestigious science journals in the world, and that will be rubbish 2 weeks later by a new model, a new approach. It's so difficult sometimes. And I struggle with it. I struggle with that. And we've got to think, we've got to place sometimes our intellectual energies into situations that are uncomfortable for us and try and support and help. I don't know, I'm not using the right terminology, but these are difficult and complex situations. And sometimes we've just got to be, we've got to get out of our comfort zones and be prepared to challenge ourselves and everything we do stand for in the contemporary world.
Thanks, Carl. I mean, I would just add, Cardiff, we all know Cardiff. So Cardiff is surrounded by swathes of communities that face huge social and economic challenges and have done for many years. We have incredibly low take-up to higher education in many of these communities. Appalling, actually. Even in Cardiff itself, the communities we work with in Ely and Cairo, 7% of school leavers there go into higher education. Go up the road to Llandaff, it's 80%. So now that's problematic, because I've been working in those schools for 10 years, and I can tell you there's plenty of talent there. There's plenty of diverse voices. There's plenty of knowledge there that could come, that would be bringing a different perspective. But breaking down those barriers to a higher education is absolutely fundamental. And at the moment, I would suggest that, generally speaking, the sector, higher education sector, does that a little bit in an underwhelming way, I think, I'm being generous to say that. But I do think this is where, this is where embedding ourselves within communities, this is something that we've tried in this work, embedding academics, the right academics, within community, within marginalised contexts, working alongside in a co-productive way, where we actually have an equal, to some extent, equal and reciprocal relationship, addressing Julia's comment in there about, we do need the experts, but the experts need to be people who are willing to take on board and learn from the people that they're embedded with as well. So I think, but by, if you like, creating new paths together with those kinds of communities, you also, subtext, you break down barriers to higher education, because, it becomes clear that actually this isn't something that, is just an elite pastime, or that, that we have our students working alongside, kids in these areas. So I think, that is, there are models there that work, and it's not just in heritage either. There are models in other contexts too. We have a project in architecture where, embedding within communities can work, but that takes trust. It takes years to build up, and it takes money, and the money isn't there forthcoming. The problem will be, of course, in the next 2 years, what are we going to see in terms of the economic and social environment following the pandemic? And, universities really have to step up to that. And of course, the heritage sector is also, being put in the front line for that, even though both sectors are under threat financially. I don't know the answers, but I know that models can work. Duncan.
Yeah, you're right. We do need to provide more opportunities for people of any background to enter higher education. But once they do, how many of them do you think we should be encouraging to do archaeology? I wouldn't even encourage my own children, who are not underprivileged really, to do archaeology. And lots of people keep telling me, I hope you're not going to let them become archaeologists. Find them something more lucrative to do. And so, you know, we have to get ourselves into perspective in that sense. Higher education is you know, and we all know that doing an archaeology degree can lead to a whole plethora of opportunities in many different disciplines, because you learn so much about so many different subjects. But getting that across even to the people who, even to vice chancellors, is difficult enough. Doing it to people who don't habitually regard higher education as their natural outcome of their lives is even more difficult. You're right, we have to get into those communities to do that, but we don't want to raise expectations. I mean, in answer to Katie, I've never known a time when funding has been that great, to be honest. Certainly not in my time in museums. We were 15 years I was a museum curator, give or take, and we never had a period of increased funding. The best we could hope for was no decrease in our funding. So, you know, this isn't a new situation. Meanwhile, out in the commercial sector, there's plenty going on, up and down in its own way. But reports from colleagues is that this year has been better than expected, given what's going on elsewhere. So if people want to do that, you know, I'm not sure whether this discussion is focusing entirely on higher education and the academic world, or whether we really are talking about archaeology in all its forms. Because outside of academia, it's possible to have a career. It's hard. It's always been hard. Thanks, Carl. Yeah, I've been doing it for quite a long time. I don't even think I've had a career. I've just had a loosely assembled series of jobs that have turned from one into another. That's the best I could hope for when I graduated. And I'm not sure anyone else would experience it that differently, very few people. So we have to work a lot harder than other disciplines if we want to attract a more diverse audience and more diverse participants into our discipline.
Yes, Sean.
Yeah, just reflecting on some of the work that's gone on here, partly to lever funding into sort of heritage areas, but also to really get out and engage with the community. There have been a range of programs. The most recent that I participated in was a program called Urban Villages, which is about there are very static and old communities based in some of the urban centres in Northern Ireland, and a surprisingly little engagement between people in those communities and even things like the city centre of the towns. So the urban villages, they're areas of social deprivation in particular, are there's been a scheme, and part of the issue about outcomes-based public policy is a way of allowing museums to address social issues and lever funding to be mechanisms for delivering change in those communities. And one of the great things about the Urban Villages programme, it wasn't aimed at getting young people into higher education or necessarily making big life changes in the people, but what it was about was creating the capacity within that community for them to start telling their own stories of the past. And it involved, I mean, I got involved with them on how to display things, how to clean objects, how to work towards exhibitions if that's what they wanted to do within their local communities. But it was the older people in particular who got engaged with the programme. But it was a very powerful mechanism for creating aspiration in the community. And that was one of the very positive things that came out of it. These were people who suddenly felt that their story was interesting and that other people might engage with them on the stories that they had within their communities, which were, generally recent past rather than ancient past, but it was a very powerful mechanism for empowering people to tell their own stories and to believe that they had something important to say, and actually very aspirational for the younger generations, because through that we had and this is when I was with National Museums Northern Ireland, but through that we then had younger generations of people wanting to come and do placements at the museum. So suddenly seeing it as something that wasn't, there weren't barriers to. So a nice way of getting people involved, even though it wasn't directed at them in particular.
Thanks, Siobhan. I totally agree with all of that, and I think we've seen we've been working with community development organisation in the work we've been doing in Ely, and it wasn't just about the higher education, although I think that is fundamentally important, but sometimes it's just about being part. I mean, that's the beauty of archaeology, isn't it? It brings people together. It is unifying. It's that thing that I think a number of the speakers were talking about, how that collective endeavour, it gets people, some people who are facing really significant challenges, it gives them a sense of belonging and being part of something that's really positive, but also it allows communities to address a lot of the negative stereotypes often that are thrown at communities that are facing those issues, and to recreate the sort of past, for themselves. So I think that's a really interesting point. As James said, I think we better wrap up. I am just going to wait for one more question. I want to kill a question from someone out there, just to wrap this up. No pressure at all.
Can we hear from students?
Yes, please. Does any students have any? We have had questions from postgraduates, I have to say, so it's putting a lot of pressure on them there, James. Thank you. Okay, there's a question here. How do the panel think that our discipline can work better to achieve these aims together? That's an excellent question. We seem very siloed into museums, commercial academia, national heritage bodies. Crossover projects and crossover working between these areas are really difficult, as many of us know. And I think this picks up a point. I think this is a point you were making, Duncan, wasn't it? Or I can't quite remember now. But yes, please, panel, that's an excellent question to end on. How can we work better together?
Yeah, the point I was making, Dave and Susan, was that the study of the past is not specific to archaeology. We need to broaden our discussions and our sense of collectivity and cooperation to include historians, which is really hard, I know, and oral historians and archivists and anybody else, to get a single message across, the single message that the study of the past is important, and to explain to people why that is the case. I agree. We always seem very siloed, as my good friend Paul Blinkhorn observed on television. You put two archaeologists in a room and you've got an argument. You've got to. We've got to grow up a bit. We've got to get out of that. And museums do feel, in my experience, mostly on the margins of what happens in commercial and planning-led archaeology, because they often don't hear about projects until people are ready to deposit some archive with them. That sort of thing needs to stop. I mean, it is stopping. We're getting the message across. Yes, an argument, it can be a strength. A debate or a discussion is probably more constructive. So yeah, I think you're right. We do need to move beyond our silos, but we also need to move beyond the silo of archaeology into a broader perception of what the study of the past really involves.
I'm wondering if the lean times that we're facing might be a catalyst for moving and working better together. I'm seeing that in other areas across, community work and stuff like that, where you know, the very difficult challenges does, in a sense, brings people together and helps to forge those new partnerships. I wonder if any other panel members have a comment for that particular question.
I would agree. Well, I hope that that will be the outcome, Dave. I would say, I mean, I feel that I've had more contact, I must admit, with colleagues in museums and other sectors over the last 6 to 9 months of the pandemic than maybe I had for the last 6 years before. So if that can be built on, that would be very positive. And I think there are pockets of it, to be honest, but maybe it's not sort of demonstrated enough more widely. But I mean, for instance, I'm heavily involved at the moment on the World Heritage. It came back to our chap Pennant. I'm heavily involved at the moment on the World Heritage bid for the slate industry of North Wales, slate landscapes of North Wales. And within that partnership is the National Museum, Cadw, the local authority, private operators of sites, and local communities. And if indeed that is a successful inscription, it'll go forward next year. You know, we don't know whether it will be successful at this stage. It could well be a good model. I should also add Bangor University is also in that partnership. So effectively we do have a multi-sectoral partnership operating and working on that bid at the moment, and theoretically, if it is successful, taking it forward. And I would love to think that that could be a model for greater collaboration that we could see in other cases in Wales and further afield. But maybe I'm a glass half full person, I don't know.
Well, I think on that very positive thought that we should probably wrap things up now. I promised, I said to James we'll be finished at 15:15, and now it's nearly 20 to 7. So I've really been remiss there and let things go. But that's because it's been so wonderful and fascinating to spend time with you all. And to have this rich conversation, important conversation. Before I finish, I'd just like to say, do any panel members want to make any other points before I wrap up? If everyone's reasonably happy, then I think we will now say a very, very big thank you to all of our panellists. I'd like to open up your mics one last time and have another round of applause if possible, please. So open up your mics. And that leaves me to say thank you very much. I'd like to wish you all a very warm and lovely Christmas break. Stay safe, stay well, please. Look after yourselves. Nadolig Lawen, and enjoy your Christmas. We all have earned it. So put your feet up and have a large glass of something.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.